Chapter 9 of Fanny Herself. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Fanny Herself by Edna Ferber. Chapter 9. Mr. Fenger will see you now. Mr. Fenger, general manager, had been a long time about it. This heel-cooling experience was new to Fanny Brandeis. It had always been her privilege to keep others waiting. Still, she felt no resentment as she sat in Michael Fenger's outer office. For as she sat there, waiting, she was getting a distinct impression of this unseen man, whose voice she could just hear as he talked over the telephone in his inner office. It was characteristic of Michael Fenger that his personality reached out and touched you before you came into actual contact with the man. Fanny had heard of him long before she came to Haynes Cooper. He was the genie of that glittering lamp. All through the gigantic plant she had already met department heads, buyers, merchandise managers. One heard his name and felt the impress of his mind. "You'll have to see Mr. Fenger about that." "Yes," pointing to a new conveyor, perhaps. "That has just been installed. It's a great help to us. Doubles our shipping room efficiency. We used to use baskets pulled by a rope. It's Mr. Fenger's idea." Efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. Fenger had made it a slogan in the Haynes Cooper plant long before the German nation forced it into our everyday vocabulary. Michael Fenger was system. He could take a muddle of orders, a jungle of unfilled contracts, a horde of incompetent workers, and of them make a smooth-running and effective unit. Untangling snarls was his pastime, esprit de corps was his shibboleth, order and management his idols, and his war cry was "Results!" It was 11 o'clock when Fanny came into his outer office. The very atmosphere was vibrant with his personality. There hung about the place an air of repressed expectancy. The room was electrically charged with the high voltage of the man in the inner office. His secretary was a spare, middle-aged, anxious-looking woman in snuff brown and spectacles. His stenographer a blond young man, also spectacled and anxious. His office boy a stern youth in knickers, who bore no relation to the slangy, gum-chewing red-headed office boy of the comic sections. The low-pitched, high-powered voice went on inside, talking over the long-distance telephone. Fenger was the kind of man who is always talking to New York when he is in Chicago, and to Chicago when he is in New York. Trains with the word limited after them were invented for him and his type. A buzzer sounded. It galvanized the office boy into instant action. It brought the anxious-looking stenographer to the doorway, notebook in hand, ready. It sent the lean secretary out and up to Fanny. "Temper," Fanny said to herself, "or horribly nervous and high-keyed. They jump like a set of puppets on a string." It was then that the lean secretary had said, "Mr. Fenger will see you now." Fanny was aware of a pleasant little tingle of excitement. She entered the inner office. It was characteristic of Michael Fenger that he employed no cheap tricks. He was not writing as Fanny Brandeis came in. He was not telephoning. He was not doing anything but standing at his desk, waiting for Fanny Brandeis. As she came in he looked at her, through her, and she seemed to feel her mental processes laid open to him as a skilled surgeon cuts through skin and flesh and fat, to lay bare the muscles and nerves and vital organs beneath. He put out his hand. Fanny extended hers. They met in a silent grip. It was like a meeting between two men. Even as he indexed her, Fanny's alert mind was busy docketing, numbering, cataloging him. They had in common a certain force, a driving power. Fanny seated herself opposite him, in obedience to a gesture. He crossed his legs comfortably and sat back in his big desk chair. A great-bodied man with powerful square shoulders, a long head, a rugged crest of a nose, the kind you see on the type of Englishman who has the imagination and initiative to go to Canada or Australia or America. He wore spectacles, not the fashionable horn-rimmed sort, but the kind with gold earpieces. They were becoming, and gave a certain humanness to a face that otherwise would have been too rugged, too strong. A man of 45, perhaps. He spoke first. "You're younger than I thought." "So are you." "Old inside." "So am I." He uncrossed his legs, leaned forward, folded his arms on the desk. "You've been through the plant, Miss Brandeis?" "Yes, twice. Once with a regular tourist party, and once with the special guide." "Good. Go through the plant whenever you can. Don't stick to your own department. It narrows one." He paused a moment. "Did you think that this opportunity to come to Haynes Cooper, as assistant to the infants' wear department buyer, was just a piece of luck, augmented by a little pulling on your part? Yes. It wasn't. You were carefully picked by me, and I don't expect to find I've made a mistake. I suppose you know very little about buying and selling infants' wear? Less than about almost any other article in the world, at least in the department store or mail order world. I thought so. And it doesn't matter. I pretty well know your history, which means I know your training. You're young, you're ambitious, you're experienced, you're imaginative. There's no length you can't go with these. It just depends on how far-sighted your mental vision is. Now listen, Miss Brandeis, I'm not going to talk to you in millions. The guides do enough of that. But you know we do buy and sell in terms of millions, don't you? Well, our infants' wear department isn't helping to roll up the millions, and it ought to, because there are millions of babies born every year, and the golden spoon kind are in the minority. I've decided that the department needs a woman, your kind of woman. Now, as a rule, I never employ a woman when I can use a man. There's only one other woman filling a really important position in the merchandise end of this business. That's Ella Monahan, head of the glove department, and she's a genius. She's a woman who is limited in every other respect, just average, but she knows glove materials in a way that's uncanny. I'd rather have a man in her place, but I don't happen to know any men glove geniuses. Tell me, what do you think of that etching? Fanny tried, and successfully, not to show the jolt her mind had received, as she turned to look at the picture to which his finger pointed. She got up and strolled over to it, and she was glad her suit fitted and hung as it did in the back. I don't like it particularly. I like it less than any other etching you have here. The walls were hung with them. Of course you understand I know nothing about them, but it's too flowery, isn't it, to be good? Too many lines. Like a writer who spoils his effect by using too many words. Fenger came over and stood beside her, staring at the black and white and gray thing in its frame. I felt that way, too. He stared down at her then. Jew? He asked. A breathless instant. No, said Fanny Brandeis. Michael Fenger smiled for the first time. Fanny Brandeis would have given everything she had, everything she hoped to be able to take back that monosyllable. She was gripped with horror at what she had done. She had spoken almost mechanically. And yet that monosyllable must have been the fruit of all these months of inward struggle and thought. Now I begin to understand you, Fenger went on. You've decided to lop off all the extra senses, eh? Well, I can't say that I blame you. A woman in business is handicapped enough by the fact of her sex. He stared at her again. Too bad you're so pretty. I'm not, said Fanny hotly, like a schoolgirl. That's a thing that can't be argued, child. Beauty's subjective, you know. I don't see what difference it makes anyway. Oh, yes, you do. He stopped. Or perhaps you don't, after all. I forget how young you are. Well, now, Miss Brandeis, you and your woman's mind and your masculine business experience and sense are to be turned loose on our infants' wear department. The buyer, Mr. Slosson, is going to resent you. Naturally. I don't know whether we'll get results from you in a month, or 6 months, or a year, or ever. But something tells me we're going to get them. You've lived in a small town most of your life, and we want that small town viewpoint. Do you think you've got it? Fanny was on her own ground here. If knowing the Wisconsin small-town woman, and the Wisconsin farmer woman, and man too for that matter, means knowing the Oregon and Wyoming and Pennsylvania and Iowa people of the same class, then I've got it. Good. Michael Fenger stood up. I'm not going to load you down with instructions or advice. I think I'll let you grope your own way around and bump your head a few times. Then you'll learn where the low places are. And, Miss Brandeis, remember that suggestions are welcome in this plant. We take suggestions all the way from the elevator starter to the president. His tone was kindly, but not hopeful. Fanny was standing too, her mental eye on the door, but now she turned to face him squarely. Do you mean that? Absolutely. Well, then, I've one to make. Your stock boys and stock girls walk miles and miles every day, on every floor of this 15-story building. I watched them yesterday, filling up the bins, carrying orders, covering those enormous distances from one bin to another, up one aisle and down the next, to the office, back again. Your floors are concrete or cement or some such mixture, aren't they? I just happened to think of the boy who used to deliver our paper on Norris Street in Winnebago, Wisconsin. He covered his route on roller skates. It saved him an hour. Why don't you put roller skates on your stock boys and girls? Fenger stared at her. You could almost hear that mind of his working, like a thing on ball bearings. Roller skates. It wasn't an exclamation. It was a decision. He pressed a buzzer, the snuff-brown secretary buzzer. Tell Clancy I want him, now. He had not glanced up or taken his eyes from Fanny. She was aware of feeling a little uncomfortable, but elated, too. She moved toward the door. Fenger stood at his desk. Wait a minute. Fanny waited. Still Fenger did not speak.